Help me hit 7,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Thank you. My name is Callum Hart, and I've been married to my wife, Alara, for 7 steady, ordinary years. She's bright, thoughtful, a little shy in big rooms, and the type who still blushes when someone compliments her earrings. I've always admired how softly she moves through the world. Never loud, never confrontational, never trying to be the star of anything. Which is why the night everything changed still feels unreal, like a moment ripped out of someone else's life and dropped into mine. It started with an invitation, her company's annual winter mixer. Alara works in project strategy for a mid-sized tech firm, the kind of place where everyone speaks in half-jokes about deliverables and alignment. I usually avoid these corporate events, but she squeezed my hand and said, "It would mean a lot if you came this year. The team's been asking to meet you." So I went. For her. Because she rarely asks for anything. The hotel ballroom was warm and buzzing, full of well-polished smiles and people pretending they weren't watching the clock for the open bar to close. Alara introduced me around Mira, her best friend at work, Jonas, the cheerful guy from finance, and finally Dorian Vale, her department lead. I'd heard his name before, always casually, always in the background of her stories. Dorian approved the budget. Dorian said the timeline looks good. Dorian asked for a revisions update. Never anything unusual. Never any warning bells. Until that night. When she introduced us, Dorian looked me over in a way that wasn't unfriendly, but wasn't respectful either. More assessing. Like he was cataloging what kind of man she'd married. He shook my hand harder than necessary. "So this is the famous husband," he said, smiling just a bit too long. Alara laughed. Polite, uncertain. I felt the first small tug of discomfort in my chest, but I brushed it off. Crowded rooms make people weird. I wish that had been the worst of it. As the evening went on, people loosened up. Champagne, small talk, slightly too loud jokes. It was the usual rhythm of corporate gatherings. I stepped away for a few minutes to grab us fresh drinks. When I returned, I spotted Alara near the far wall, talking to Dorian again. At first nothing seemed off. They were laughing at something he said, and she looked relaxed, comfortable. Then, as I walked closer, I saw it. His hand, resting low on her back. Not the polite, safe part near the shoulder blades. Lower. Possessive. Familiar. A place no man touches a married woman unless he's crossing a line on purpose. Alara froze the moment she realized I'd seen it. Her smile flickered out like someone cut a wire. She stepped sideways, subtle, quick. But Dorian didn't move his hand. If anything, he pressed it firmer, like he was staking a quiet claim in front of me. That was the moment something cold slid through me. Not anger, not yet, but clarity. A clean, sharp recognition of what kind of man he was. The kind who tests boundaries to see who's too polite, too shy, or too scared to push back. I walked up, handed Alara her drink, and looked directly at him. He removed his hand, pretending he hadn't noticed what he'd done, pretending nothing had happened. He gave me that same long, assessing stare, except now there was challenge in it. "So, Callum," he said, "Alara tells us you do consulting. Must be flexible work." There it was. The dig, the subtle belittling, the attempt to undercut, to dominate. All while watching my wife's reaction. Alara shifted uncomfortably. She knew exactly what he was doing. I could see the apology in her eyes, even though she hadn't done a thing wrong. I should have confronted him right there. But I didn't, because something else hit me. Something darker, something smarter. This man wasn't just inappropriate. He was arrogant, entitled, and deeply unaware of how fragile power can be when someone knows where the pressure points are. So instead of reacting, I smiled. Calm. Even polite. "You know," I said lightly, "my schedule is flexible. It lets me meet interesting people. Learn interesting things." Dorian didn't know it, but I already had leverage. Big leverage. The kind that could shatter the foundation he stood on. I hadn't planned to use it. Not until that moment. Alara touched my arm gently. "Callum, let's just go mingle." But I wasn't mingling anymore. I was watching him, studying him, And every minute he thought he'd gotten away with touching my wife made my decision even easier. That was the night I stopped being polite. And the night his career began to end. The room felt warmer, louder somehow, but I was detached, like watching from above. Every laugh Dorian gave, every confident tilt of his head, was a step closer to the reckoning he didn't yet know was coming. I waited for the right moment. Not a confrontation in front of everyone. That would have been amateurish. No, I needed subtlety, precision. I had one night, one chance, and I intended to use it. A few hours later, the party started thinning. People were leaving in pairs or small groups, saying polite goodbyes, patting each other on the back. Alara excused herself for a quick break to the ladies' room. I followed at a distance, careful not to appear threatening, careful not to scare her. Dorian, of course, noticed me following. He narrowed his eyes, curiosity flickering across his face. I kept calm, neutral, friendly. The smile never left my face. We ended up near the balcony, a corner of the hotel overlooked by chandeliers and strings of cold white lights. He leaned against the railing, casually flipping his drink in his hand. That's when I made the mistake, thinking he could still outmaneuver me. "You're quite the charmer tonight," he said. His words were smooth, but I heard the arrogance under them. The entitlement. "I just like to make people comfortable," I replied lightly, "especially when they think the room is theirs by default." He laughed. Short, sharp, too confident. "Come on, Callum. We both know what this is about. Your wife, she's radiant, intelligent, captivating. You're lucky to have her." That was the moment I stopped playing casual. My tone dropped just a fraction, calm but sharp enough to cut through the room's fading background music. "Dorian," I said, "I think you forget one thing. You don't get to touch someone else's life and expect to walk away unscathed. Ever." His smirk faltered. I could see it, the first crack. He wasn't used to being addressed like this. Not publicly, not privately, not at all. I stepped closer, close enough that he had to pay attention, but far enough to respect the space of a man who still didn't realize he was in over his head. "You make assumptions about power, privilege, and women like Alara. That's fine. But you should also know that people notice. They remember. And every little misstep," I let the pause stretch just long enough, "is a story they tell. One way or another." His jaw tightened. Something shifted in him, a fraction of recognition, perhaps fear. That's when I pulled out my phone. Calmly, smoothly, I said, "Funny. I happened to record the evening. Just a casual clip. Nothing inappropriate, except for the part where you forgot boundaries." Dorian's face went pale. What are you?" "I'll let HR and the legal team fill in the blanks," I said, voice steady. "I'm sure you'll find your career very short if this clip makes its rounds. People tend to frown upon men who cross lines like that." He swallowed, stuttered. His arrogance was evaporating under the weight of reality. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I walked away then, returning to Alara with her soft smile, pretending nothing had happened. But he knew. Oh, he knew. And from that moment on, everything he thought he controlled was gone. 2 weeks later, I heard through mutual contacts. Dorian had been placed on leave pending investigation. HR called for interviews. Colleagues who once whispered his praises were now hesitant, nervous, questioning. The man who thought he could test boundaries at my wife's expense was already being dismantled piece by piece. Alara never asked me to do anything. She didn't even want me involved. And yet, she looked at me after the event with a soft, almost imperceptible nod, a quiet acknowledgement. One that said, "Thank you without words." I realized something important that night. Not about power, not about revenge, not about humiliation, but about respect. It's not given, it's earned, and it can be taken away just as decisively when someone forgets their place. I didn't celebrate. There was no victory dance, no smug gloating. I simply went home, held Alara close, and let the silence stretch between us like a shield. The world had shifted. The man who tried to assert himself over my family's boundaries had learned a lesson in the most direct way possible. Some lines are not to be crossed. That night, When the lights went out, Alara's hand in mine felt lighter, safer, complete, and I understood, in that calm, reflective way that comes after anger has subsided, that protecting someone you love doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it means foresight, strategy, patience, and the quiet, undeniable power of knowing exactly when and how to act. I never wanted him to fear me personally. I wanted him to fear the consequences of his own choices. And from the moment I left that balcony, he knew exactly what that meant. Some people might call it revenge. I call it clarity, because in the end, no one touches the people you love and walks away unscathed. Not on my watch.